We are the Association for Child and Adolescent Mental Health, or ACAM for short, and this is ACAM Learn.
Welcome to Inside the Teen Brain. This ACAM series will leave you inspired by best practice and armed with tips to transform your work. I'm Dr. Jane Gilmour and I have a special interest in the teenage brain. From puberty to about the age of 25, the brain is in a unique state, with core drives including identity, novelty, risk, peers, respect, autonomy, and intense emotions. In discussion with leading CAMS professionals, each episode will explore one of these developmental drives, and during our conversation, we answer three big questions. What's the background? So what? And now what? Today we look inside the teen brain and examine identity. This episode is called Just Be Yourself. So let's go to our first big question. What does the literature tell us? Just be yourself, they say, and that's all very well, but it's a major task when you haven't quite figured out who you are. In the 60s, Erikson described adolescence as the time to resolve identity confusion, and that classic framework has been supported by many longitudinal studies. Interestingly, MRI data are also consistent. The brain networks linked to self-reflection light up more frequently during adolescence than at any other stage of development. The concepts proposed by Erikson have since been extended by Marcia and later Meas, exploring, for example, depth of identity exploration, where deep investigation is linked to a positive outcome. Young people's self-concepts vacillate, particularly during the younger teenage years. The transition between identities is a time of vulnerability when adolescents are highly sensitive to feedback from those around them. Non-verbal feedback, like a negative stare, may be more influential than verbal, given the established sensitivity of the teenage brain to non-verbal cues. The environment is highly influential to identity formation. Chameleon-like, teens change identity dependent on their surroundings. For example, Blakemore's lab examined adolescents' descriptions of themselves on and offline. Results showed distinct presentation styles for different social media platforms. We know too that significant others are likely to influence formation and stability of identity, though the effect could be bidirectional. Parents, teachers, and we might hypothesize mental health professionals influence self-concept both intentionally and unintentionally. Given the salience of peers in a teenager's world, it's not surprising that attachment to peers is particularly central to the process. Certainly Steinberg and Morris showed that the social identity of a peer group, say delinquent or academic, has strong links to personal identity. Indeed, a multitude of people and experiences offer young people a social laboratory to find out who they are. Now we turn to our second big question and ask, so what? To consider what this means in practice, I'm delighted to welcome Deborah Christie, Professor of Pediatric and Adolescent Psychology, an award-winning consultant psychologist. She specialises in solution-focused, motivational and narrative therapies. More on this later. She has authored more than 200 peer-reviewed publications, best-selling books and critical expert reports. So I think it's certainly time for a Christie masterclass. Deborah.
Hello, Jane. How are you?
So great to have you. We are just delighted to have your expertise.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
I have a whole gamut of questions that I hope we will be able to cover.
Okay.
And I want to start with the first one. We've established from the literature that identity formation is a core task for adolescents. And I have read in a key paper you recently published about the methods of using the tree of life to help young people articulate who they are. So could you describe the tree of life to those that are not familiar?
Okay, so let me start with the roots of the tree of life itself. There's some people I think it's really important just to mention before we start talking about what it is. The roots, the tree of life grew out of work by Nkazela Mkube and the Dulwich Center And they were working with young people who had lost their parents as a result of AIDS in South Africa. And the important issue for Gazella was that talking about loss just made people very sad, and talking about the problem made people very sad. And the Dulwich Centre workers, David Denborough in particular, began to think with her about, rather than starting from the problem, what about starting from a safe place to stand before you talk about difficulties. So the tree of life is a metaphor, really. And along with my colleagues Glenda Fredman and Lucy Castagli, we began to think about how we could offer young people who were living with the challenges of diabetes a riverbank position, a safe place to stand before talking about the problems, and also how to have fun, and to start with what people know, what they're actually familiar with. So
I'm really struck by the idea of the metaphor. I think that's a wonderful, and you talk about that safe place because it's slightly disconnected from me. So I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, and if you think about it, you know, if you're in the middle of the river and you're trying to swim, there are crocodiles and there are rocks in the river, and you're banging your head and you're running away from the crocodiles, it's really very, very hard to think about yourself whilst you're in the middle of that tumultuous torrent. So being able to stand on the side of the river is the beginning, and the tree is the metaphor for who you are. So I think we're going through the magic of technology. Somebody's going to put up a picture of a tree, and you'll see that the tree obviously has got roots. The tree is in the ground. It has a trunk. It has branches and leaves and flowers and fruits. And I want you to imagine that what you would do, Jane, is maybe the easiest way is just me to ask you these questions to start.
Go for it.
Imagine that you were, I asked you to just draw a tree. So that's how you begin. You just begin by drawing a tree, and it doesn't have to be particularly artistic. You just draw a tree and you say, don't forget to put some roots in and a bit of ground, and have a trunk as big or as little as you want to, and put some branches on there. And draw some leaves and draw some fruits and draw some flowers.
Okay, let's imagine I've done that.
Yeah, so just, that's what you start off with. And so then I ask you to now tell me, and you can do this, tell me a little bit about your roots. Where do you come from? What would you draw if you were to draw on the roots of your tree? What would be some key bits about you that you would think were important?
Well, do you know what I'm going to do, Deborah? I'm going to keep a young person in mind that I worked with not long ago, because I just thought this would be really useful for me. I'll get 2 jobs done in the space of one space. So this young man was a 2nd generation immigrant living in the city, in the pretty urban environment. Had lots of extended family around, lots of immediate family and extended family. And was the 2nd of 4 kids, 2 younger sisters, 1 older brother, super bright older brother, and very much at the center of his family. What else?
And the important thing about this, though, is you have to suspend your knowledge and expertise in him.
So yes,
you might think those would be the things that he would put down, but he might not. And you can't say, oh, but what about, and don't forget. And because this is the key thing is about what this is for you. It's your identity and not the identity that somebody else might be imposing on you. So when you're working with somebody that you know quite well already, it's really important to bite your tongue and not say, oh, and don't forget.
Yeah.
Okay, it's, like when we're doing motivational interviewing and we're asking people a decisional balance, we don't tell them what we think the advantages of change would be. We invite them to tell us. So the same thing applies here. What does he think his roots and culture and family history would be? So he may put some of that down and he may not. You then move up to the ground. Once he's put down 4 or 5 bits and pieces, and you would ask him to put down some hobbies. What does he do day to day?
Football, football, football.
Okay, so
football.
that might be all he puts down. Might be all that he puts down. He might just put football down. But you can gently say, what else? What else might go down in the ground? What's the soil that the tree is planted in?
So maybe some gaming, maybe.
Yeah, so that might come in.
And helping my little sister. I think that's the thing that
he would talk about.
Yeah.
Okay, so he would put that down. And then you would say to him, so, okay, let's look at the trunk of the tree. Now, the trunk of the tree is the thing that gives it its strength. Okay, it's important to have lots of roots, to hold you down. It's important to have good ground, but it's important to have a trunk. And on our trunk, I want you to write down all the things you're good at, all the things that your skills that you have, all your abilities, and you invite them to write that down. Now, one of the things about the Tree of Life is it's always done in large groups. Now, as well, okay, I'm going to come back on that. It's not always done because I use it individually in practice, but but the way it was developed was it's in a workshop environment. It's with a group of kids. So all of the kids are writing down what they think they're good at and what they think they're able to do. Now, this can be tough for kids who have got low self-esteem or who are living in a problem-saturated world. So again, you have to restrain your desire to say, oh, but you've told me that you're good at that, or you've told me that you're good at that, and just help them come up with those things themselves. So just patiently saying, well, what else do you think? What else has somebody else told you you're good at? That question that's quite useful for adolescents is when you ask them, what do they like doing? And they say, I don't know. So if you put it into the third person, which is, well, what will your mates say that you like doing, or what will your mates say you're good at? They're then able to say, my friends will tell me I'm good at football. So football might appear as on one of his skills as well. So having spent a bit of time filling out the trunk and writing on the trunk, you then move on to the branches. Now, branches are hopes and dreams. So, wording this is saying on each of the branch, put a hope or put a dream or something that you'd like to happen in the future, something that, that will grow out of this trunk, anything that you can think of at all. Now, some kids are very good at doing this and will fill this out, and other kids will have very few branches filled out. But that's okay, because, like all trees, it's an organic thing, and you can add to it for as long as you want to. And you can add to it during the workshop as well as in this moment. But we're just trying to get something on paper to start with.
And I love that. It was actually going to be one of my questions, to think about how we can adapt to an evolving identity, which we know is very much central to the adolescent experience. So that idea of an organic, moving, growing thing is wonderful. So we can change those identities, and I guess a branch might fall off and a new one grows. That
Exactly.
sort of idea.
Exactly. And I've got people I've worked with who've taken their trees away and put them on their wardrobes, and then as the work has progressed, you can come back to it and say, oh wow, is that a new skill? I wondered, do you want to put that on your tree? Do you still have your tree of life? You could add that to your tree of life. So then and you can see on the picture that we've got up here that you then ask them to put on each leaf of the tree a significant person. And again, no clues, no giving them any tips here, because you might desperately want them to put mum, dad, and my psychologist down. But I was always used to smile at the number of times I got left off the tree. It was like,
I don't take it personally.
Yeah,
I think this young man would name, he had 3 or 4 really good friends, and his little sister always came into the picture. So I think that's what I don't think he would mention parents.
Yeah, and that in itself is quite interesting. But I think it's worth kind of, you can encourage gently by saying, well, who else has, been in your life? Who else, right now is important to you? And the other thing that you can do is you say, do you know they can be people from films, or they can be people from books, or they can be people from things and as well. So we've got leaves, which are the people. And people can, and the nice thing about this is you can keep going. Do you want to add any more skills? Do you want to add anything else? You know, you can move back and forwards. We then add flowers, which are gifts that you have given to people, and we add fruits, that gifts that people have given to you. Now, you might want to explain that a bit for younger kids, but you know, what presents have people given you? What things have people given you that you really valued? Now,
and would they be metaphorical or material gifts, or either?
Either, however people take it. So, you know, for me, one of the things that I always put down is that my dad gave me confidence. So I would always put down confidence. And gifts I've given to others, I would probably always put a smile. But, you know, but I think I make, well, not everybody, but, you know, most people smile. So again, you know, it's again, and if you were to kind of link it to the idea of solution-focused therapy, people might be familiar with the idea of the miracle question. Is just because you don't think the person's ever going to be an Oscar Hollywood actor or actress doesn't mean that that's not their miracle. So you have to be very neutral and be very good at kind of like saying, well, what else do you think? What else would you like to put on there? It's their tree.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the first stage. And the next bit of the process is the narrative, where the narrative therapy comes in. And I know you can put resources up. So there's a really nice paper by Lucy Casdagley, which you can let people know about, which is all about this process, and talks about how it works, but also the sorts of questions that you would ask when you do the next stage, which is the thickening. So you might come to in the workshop, what happens is young people are interviewed, and they're interviewed usually by a member of the group facilitators. There's 2 or 3 group facilitators who would, in front of everybody, say, let me ask you a few questions about your tree. So let me ask you a little bit about football. You've got football on your trunk as a skill. Tell me a bit about that. How come you're good at football? What's helped you become good at football? Who is it that's helped you become good at football? You know, who have been the people that have helped you? So you invite and you elaborate stories of skills and abilities by saying, tell me a bit more about this. You historicize them. So how long have you been good at football? Where does that dream of being a footballer come from? Who taught you that? So you can see bringing people from the system in, and bring into relationships with others. Who notices that you're good at football? Who do you share being good at football with? So does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that's wonderful. So because these are such revealing questions, they're all delivered through the football forum, but actually will be very revealing in terms of, you know, what's important and who's important. And
here you connect up to the leaves. So who supports you in this now? Who makes it possible for you to do this? Is there anybody that you haven't thought of that you want to add to your leaves?
And it really makes me think about the literature that we touched on at the beginning, about that influential network that really helps a young person develop their identity. And those very people will be the network that are underpinning that young person's stability and type of identity. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. And, you know, and again, you know, depending on how long you've got in your interview and depending on the sorts of questions you ask, you might ask questions like, so, you know, I noticed, you know, in your roots that you've talked about, you know, your family, how has your family supported you developing these football skills? And who's given you, you know, and he talks about a coach that gave him some lessons once, or he talks about somebody he saw on, you know, a footballer that he saw, like, you know, Marcus Rashford, and maybe connects with the fact that somebody that he's seen on television gave him hope. If he's a young man from a particular ethnic group, he might have a particular footballer that makes him realize that actually he could achieve this in a, if he's a refugee or something like that, then seeing somebody who was a refugee will give him hope. So you can start to make those connections by questioning, by narrative questioning. So every kid in the workshop does this, and everybody's listening. And then what you do is you invite people to add or to give some gifts. Oh. So what have you heard about that makes you impressed or interested in this? And you might have brought out skills like determination, because when you're asking him about football, he might have said, oh well, it's been very hard and I couldn't afford the football boots, but I went anyway and played in my trainers. But then so and so gave me a pair of secondhand boots and I've just never given up. Wow, what do you call never giving up? Is there a word that you use to describe that? Yes, well, it's called perseverance. Okay, well, I noticed perseverance isn't on there, but let's put perseverance on there.
Oh, lovely. So you're teasing out these fruits.
Yeah, you're thickening and thickening and thickening the identity.
And I'm particularly struck by that idea of using the peer group, because we know how important the peer group is to a young person in the adolescent phase.
Yeah.
And in the paper, you stretch the metaphor beautifully by talking about the forest of life. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, that's right. Which is our next bit.
Well, the witnessing idea is very interesting. Can you talk to us about that in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, I mean, the next bit of the workshop would involve all of the young people who've all had a chance to share their trees and all had a chance to thicken their stories and all been given some fruits and flowers by everybody. So they've given, I've given him, I would say to him, listening to you talking, I want to give you this. I think you've got perseverance. I want to put that on your tree as a skill that you have, and I write it on a post-it note and I pop it onto the tree. And of course, if you get very fancy and you can buy post-it notes in the shape of fruits.
Oh, can you?
You really get fancy, good old Amazon and other delivery companies are. So you would, you can do also, or you can just use plain old bits of paper and a bit of blue tack, if you don't have all of that. So then what happens is each tree gets put up onto a wall. And we can, if you can imagine, you have a wall filled with these pictures, filled with these trees. You have a forest and you invite people to wander amongst the forest. Go and have a look at the forest. And they all look at the forest and they all start to think, oh, wow, I want to add something else to that one. So you can keep adding. So you create what we call the forest of life.
It's absolutely beautiful. I love the metaphor, and it's such a powerful one, because also the idea of a forest standing together being a stronger environment, of there being an ecology there. It's absolutely beautiful. And the physical walking around I hadn't quite appreciated from the paper, but the idea that the young people physically walk around and look at one another's trees. Yeah,
everybody. It's a really emotional thing to do, actually, when you see them all together and you can kind of see the comparisons and the similarities. When young people get to understand that actually, they have similar things. And they can add as they go. If you want to add something to somebody's tree, you can add it, something that you heard them talking about, something. And kids are so generous with each other. They're so generous, and they just give, once they get the hang of it, it's hard to stop them putting stuff on.
But you are so warm and imaginative in the way you describe the tree. Have you ever come across a young person, or indeed, because you are so warm and imaginative, I imagine it hasn't quite happened in your orbit, but have you ever heard of a young person saying, I don't know what a tree is all about. I'm not doing a tree. I'm not engaging with that. In other words, do you ever have to work hard to deliver, to deliver the metaphor in the first instance? Or do you think young people are connecting with that metaphor straight away in most instances?
I think you have to do a bit of groundwork. I mean, I do think you have to do a bit of groundwork. So before, the kids that we started working on this with were young people with diabetes. And they were often young people who were struggling, and they had been referred to psychology and had said, no, thank you. Often not as politely as that. And so what we did was we would call them up and say, would you come and help us? We've got a project. And we would love you to come and talk about your strengths and abilities and your skills.
Oh, that's beautiful, because you're using the consultative model. You're saying, look, I need your help. Can you help me? Which is playing to the strengths of the teenage brain. So it's a piece of genius.
Beautiful. Well, it's, as I said, it wasn't us that invented it. We've just adapted it. It was, you know, it was Incube that really that developed this wonderful program, and it's the thing about it is it is adaptable, and there are so many different teams that have taken this and used it in different conditions. You can, you know, that's been used with adults. It's been used with adults in psychiatric settings. It can be used for kids with things like epilepsy. And I've even used, I mean, I've even used it with adults in coaching environments where people have really low self-esteem and just don't know where they want to go. And so we just stop and just do this and say, let's find out who you are.
Yeah.
And if you're in an individual, you know, it's not as powerful when you do it in a one-to-one. It's definitely not as powerful, but you can do it with an individual. And the other thing that you can do is you can do the team of life, where you use a different metaphor. So a kid who's football, this young man you've just talked about, football crazy, he could do a team of life where what you do is you present him with a football pitch and you invite him to tell you who's on the bench, who's in the changing rooms, who's the coach, what position he plays on the team, what's the team music, what's the team uniform. So you can do the team of life. But I remember we all got a bit carried away, and it almost became a competition. I think somebody did an orchestra of life. I'm sure that's been published. So you can actually do an anything of life. It's you get the metaphor that works really. We present it as a tree, and I've never had any. But you know, I don't know. I've never had a kid say, "Stick your tree." Honest with you. Some of them struggle to make it as beautiful as you would like it to be. And you think, oh, what about, and why don't you put this on? And blah, blah. But actually, when they're all sitting around and you haven't said, we're now going to talk about your diabetes. You've said, we'd like you all to just do some drawing in silence.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay, I can do that.
It's a step, you know, a step away from it, which allows them to step towards you.
It's a safe place to stand.
And it's a safe place to stand. It's a really important phrase, I think, that we can take. And I'm really struck by the idea of the power of being in that peer group, and the idea that as in a peer group together, which is a much more powerful place and a much safer place for a young person to be in lots of ways, although they will be referencing one another. The way you're talking about that is they reference one another in a positive way, and it becomes a supportive environment, obviously facilitated by you and by the other peers. I also really like, I was talking to some young people about their CAMHS experience not long ago, and again, they said the most important thing, and the most important part of their experience was that somebody talked about what they were interested in. And the way you're talking about adapting that metaphor means that we can do that, whether I'm a footballer, a music player, or, you know, whatever I am, I can use that metaphor. And I think that creativity in work with young people just shines through so strongly. I mean, it's the one I really remember as a sort of spoiler. Deborah was my mentor when I was a trainee, and I hadn't seen anybody use techniques with such creativity before, and it's really something that stuck with me all the way through my career. But it really is something that matters to young people. It matters very much that you can embed what matters to them in a therapeutic technique, and that is just, you know, it's really inspirational. I think that's fantastic.
Well, you've done very well, Jean.
Well, thank you. I want to while we pat ourselves on the back, I want to think about failure now. I want to, make like Elizabeth Day and embrace failures. You've been there and done that with the Tree of Life.
Mm-hmm.
And can you cast your mind back and think about what was your favorite mistake? What was perhaps the most difficult moment with it? And what did you learn from it?
That's all. That's like that interview question, isn't it? What's your weaknesses?
Oh no, it's not. It's not.
I think it's about it's about learning from what went well and what didn't go well.
Yeah.
And I think so I'm just trying to think what's the most helpful thing to say. I think it's about trusting the process. And I think things go wrong when you don't trust the process. So, for example, if somebody's not filling it in for them, they're being kind of like, oh, well, let me help you, or let me make some suggestions, because then it becomes your tree and not theirs. That doesn't happen often, but I think there are times when in any therapeutic situation, when you become overwhelmed by the writing reflex, and I'm talking about the RIGHT writing reflex, where you feel compelled to fix it, you feel compelled to make it go right, and so therefore you abandon the process and just kind of say, well, let's change things, or let's not carry on, or let's stop because this isn't working. I think when you do that, it actually does stop working.
Yeah.
Because you lose the power. And the power of this is to just sit with it. And because it's somebody who doesn't fill in a lot on their tree, the other young people rescue them. And the questions that you ask them, the questions that you invite them to ask, really allow them to start seeing themselves as having an identity that other people recognize and appreciate. So I think the times when it hasn't gone so well have been when I have, and it still happens when you allow the writing reflex to take over.
And it's a very important piece of therapeutic information. If a young person is sitting with an empty tree, if we think about that experience, and it may be a transition period in terms of their identity, and not quite knowing where they're connecting, or who they're connecting with, or what they feel is on their ground. And again, the idea of the peer group diving in and saying, what about this? Or you're listen to me, and, you could put that on the tree, is much more powerful than a much older therapist, trying to right that wrong, as it were.
I think that's really true. And one of the things that we developed with this process was we started saying to the young people who'd gone through the process, and after the forest, you have the storms, and then you have the combating the storms, and then you have a celebration. But what we then do is say, and now would you like to come back and run the groups with us? And quite a lot of young people do. And they have a special training session, and they become a qualified peer trainer. And they then come back and they sit in and they help to run the groups. Now, you can't say to somebody, why don't you put that down on your tree? But a peer trainer can.
Yeah.
Because the peer trainers are the same, a couple of years older, maybe. We had a couple of young women who we eventually said to them, you're 24 now, and you just qualified in a career, and you're a bit old. You're nearly as old as us now. So they had to resign. But they loved coming back, and they came back, and they came back, and they came back, and they ran the groups. They got great at doing the narrative questioning and the thickening. And what was really interesting was that some of our best peer trainers were young people that never wanted to see a psychologist.
That's so interesting.
It was great. And what's really also very nice is that, they keep in touch as well, and let you know how they are doing in their life. And still, we haven't even talked about diabetes. It's the diabetes comes in at the very, 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 very end when we're talking about the storms, because we say, let's talk about the storms that affect everybody. And then we say, does diabetes introduce any additional storms? And they throw in a few. And then we talk about the combating them. But all what you've done is you've created, diabetes is just a rather annoying thunderstorm. It's an annoying wind that blows through the branches that might make the tree sway a bit. But actually the tree has all these roots, all this ground, all these skills and strong trunk, and these branches.
So it's a very evident experience for the young person that their identity is so much more than their diabetes or their
Absolutely.
illness or their, you know, whatever, the reason that they refer to CAMHS. That's the PS, and the tree is everything that I am. So it's a very powerful metaphor. I'm not surprised that you're having to ask your peer trainers to leave, because they are connected in a way that really is very powerful.
Yeah, it's really lovely. And I mean, what we hear from them is that it helps to build a positive view of themselves, and that it helps them connect with others. So it separates them from the diabetes, but they learn from each other about living with it. So you're doing that great thing where on the one hand and on the one hand. So you're learning about diabetes, but you're not diabetes. And my favorite quote of all time was one young woman who's a doctor now, medical doctor now, was that having done the Tree of Life, she realized that diabetes was one tiny little jigsaw piece in the entire jigsaw that was her life.
Oh, that is beautiful. That is just wonderful.
I know, because you just got this picture of this fabulous jigsaw and this one tiny little bit. So it really, you know, it focuses on quality, it empowers young people, it creates an open space to share experience, and it creates a feeling of togetherness. So,
well,
yeah.
Look, I can't think of a better way to end the review of the Tree of Life, because that is another metaphor that really will stick with us. And it's your, you know, it's a point at which I think you can feel your work there is done, because that young person describing that as a piece, okay, it exists, but it's not the whole of her puzzle.
Not what it said.
So I'm going to turn to our final big question and ask, now what? Now, I'd like you to draw on your extensive experience and expertise and give us one practical, low cost, but high impact tip.
Okay, always have a bunch of paper and a packet of felt pens handy.
I love that. That fulfills criteria. Do you want to expand on that? Or are we going to leave that as our tip?
I just think that, you know, sometimes people don't have the words. Sometimes you can say, okay, this isn't going very well. I'm asking you a lot of really rubbish questions. Could you draw me a picture of something? And you can say, do you like trees? do you like trees? And actually I did during the pandemic. I phoned somebody up for a Zoom call, and she said, oh, I'm just walking the dog. Oh, okay, fine. Do you want to do the session? Oh yeah, I'm in the park. I said, are you near any trees? And she said, yeah. I said, why don't you sit down under one? And she sat down under a tree, and we did the Tree of Life under a tree.
Oh, that's quite a win. That's beautiful.
So yeah, so a packet of felt pens that work, and some paper.
Yes, that work.
You can always do something with it, you know.
Okay, well, Deborah, as we close this episode of Inside the Teen Brain, it only remains for me to thank you, Professor Christie, an oracle on teenage identity. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jane. It was lovely. I so enjoyed it.